Um, have you heard this issue from other clients, or has it come up in a session recently with clients about things other than nutrition impacting nutrition?
Yeah, I think when working with clients, they kind of come to dietitians thinking, oh, like I'm just gonna work or just give me a meal plan or I just need to fix my eating. And that's really great and that's awesome to want to do that. But then they forget actually how hard just putting nutrition changes actually is. It's just not like one thing, it's a cascading of things. And I think um why it becomes hard is as people start to work on their nutrition, they realize that, like, oh man, I have troubles because it's a busy day at work, or my kids are running around everywhere, or I'm here, there, and everywhere, and I'm tired or stressed out, or just don't have time. So
Mm-hmm.
then it's like, oh, not realizing how that impacts something simple as I just want to work on my eating. But what would you think to that?
Yeah, I've lost count of how many people have started working with me, and they didn't necessarily. I mean, they probably did a really spectacular job of explaining what they needed, you know. But then you get a few sessions down the road, and all of a sudden, all these challenges come up that you weren't anticipating, and then you have to deal with those. And I there is some people that kind of expect those things, that mention whether it's job or schedule or school or home life or whatever other things, them, and it takes a lot of time, which can be challenging in some cases, because then you had this set of things that you wanted to work on, and then you start working on them, and then you like, oh, all these other things I didn't think of that are coming up that aren't even nutrition related, that are having an impact on it.
Yeah.
Where do I go from here? I feel like that's probably where most people fall off and don't stick with anything, and then end up coming to us.
Yeah. And I think actually a part of that is around expectations
Mm-hmm.
around it. Of, oh, you know what? I'm just going to all of a sudden start meal planning and then forget that meal planning has like 100 steps to be able to do that. So then it does set us up for, oh, now I can't do it, or the failure effect, or, oh man, this is literally taking off more than I can choose. So I think that's important for people and us to go, okay, like what are the expectations? What do you have time for? When we say wanting to work on nutrition, of okay, we might need to narrow that down a little bit to something a little bit more specific, goal orientated, even if it's just something as simple as I'm going to add a banana at breakfast. It's still a huge change with a lot of thought process to put in.
You ever see a conflict between what people's expectations are and what actually they're capable of?
Yes. I think so. Don't you?
Oh, I mean, I experienced this with myself. So, yes, absolutely. I mean, because I think, like, I've heard this a lot lately, where we have these priorities, and this happens early on. I find like one or two follow ups into working with a client. We already know the context. We already know what's going on. We already know what the priorities are, where we need to focus our efforts, and yet things aren't moving as quickly, and that starts to take over the story of that client's experience, because they're not as far ahead as they would have wanted to. And I find myself having to walk them through that thought process of what, well, and not to make excuses, because we don't want to just sit there and just justify failures, because that's, nobody likes doing that. But yeah, that happens. That happens quite a bit. In fact, so much so that I sometimes, depending on the client and the personality and so on, I have to like even continually build rapport. I'm not a magician. I can't just help them overcome hurdles left, right, and center that I didn't even know that were going to happen.
Yeah.
But it's on me because I'm the professional here, and they're paying me to be here, and so on. So yeah, a long-winded answer, but yeah, absolutely. But it comes in waves, though. I feel like in different ways. I mean, it's always there. Those challenges, they just come up in different ways for different people, I would say.
And I don't know if people really understand how much all of that is actually connected to our food. We tend to think of our food as this separate thing. I'm just going to work on my eating, but then ignore the other pieces. So I don't know if we really are in tune with how like lack of sleep can totally impact our ability to want to cook, drive to cook, energy to cook, until we start asking those questions, or if people really start reflecting on why is this difficult or why is that hard versus
Hmm.
just the art of nutrition, or something like underestimating stress and time to do all of this, right? Stress has a huge impact on nutrition. So I think that's part of a big part of working with clients is realizing, oh yeah, nutrition is much more than that. It's actually connected to a lot of different things, which can take a lot of appointments to actually start to put that together. It's not usually just, a flick of the hat. And that's what I actually think is really unique about dietitians, because we can look at all of those things and to how difficult those relate to why we need to eat a banana at breakfast, like how hard that could be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one of my preceptors, I remember telling me how many hats that dietitians wear that you don't consider when you start working with one, or even as you are becoming one. And I tell clients that while I don't have the training to be able to intervene in every single area, like we're not a psychologist.
Hmm.
Some of us may be trained as a psychologist and also a dietitian, but we can't provide psychotherapy to somebody. And I find that, I mean, obviously we got to stay within our scope of practice, but it's sometimes challenging because there's so many things that come up that's just like, oh, you feel like you can help somebody in those areas, but you don't necessarily know how. And you have to just
Yeah.
do what you can within the realm of nutrition and everything else. But yeah, but I can't. I think the thing that is unique about us at Revive is that we don't shy away from those conversations, even though we can't take it as far as we probably would want. We can't not talk about it, or we're just putting our heads in the sand.
Yeah. Yeah. I think if we're ignoring those questions, and you're 100% right, we can't necessarily dive right in, but that's still an important part of people's health that drives their decisions. So I think that is really unique to us because we're asking those questions and reflecting back to the clients to be like, oh, have you thought about this? Or, um, and I think people are surprised. And I had somebody this week that was like, oh, that's a really interesting question coming from a dietitian. But I totally get it. I never thought about that before, why that would be something that would be pertinent to how we're going to move forward with our health goals. So I think they think we just talk about food all day long.
You, how often does that happen where people are surprised when you ask those things?
I would say majority actually. I
Yeah.
think, I don't know, would you say majority of your clients too?
Yeah, they're either surprised in that like they don't know how to respond because they've never thought about it, which is fine. I can sense some people maybe annoyed that those things keep coming up as if not talking about them is going to help them work through it or something. But yeah, a lot of them are are yeah, it's like they weren't prepared for it. But then the clients that I love working with are the ones that will grow to kind of expect that as we work on things more and more, and we get more and more sessions in, and so on.
Yes. But I was going to make a comment, Brendan, on yours. So the people that work with me long term, yes, we'll start to like realize that that's part of the conversation that we're going to keep doing. And I have a lot of people who say things like, "Oh, finally starting to realize these things, Andrew. I've never realized them before."
Mm.
And sometimes they'll even say, "Oh, you know what? I thought it was a food issue, but now it's actually this. How can I get support in this area?" And as you said, we can't be a psychologist, but it's like, "Oh, you know what? Maybe like, yeah, let's go talk to somebody, or let's go back to talk to your doctor," because they've never put some of those pieces. So I find the ones that clients that stick around the longest are starting to embrace all the areas around it.
I would argue, and I've never actually said this to a client before. I've said it in a way like if you put in the work to honor these other areas and work on them and pay attention and put the effort in, not just on the food side, but everywhere else, whatever that is, sleep, stress, exercise, yeah, relationship with food, other relationships, whatever else. I they will progress more. They will progress maybe not quicker, maybe slower, but I find that I've had more people that got that not have to come back and work with me again because they
Yeah.
don't need to.
Yeah. I would agree with that because they're getting tools and strategies versus just looking at it from this is a nutrition issue.
Yeah. How how do you get somebody to see it? Like, so like for somebody that has never thought about these things before, not even as a way to like, hey, come work with me. Like, how would you, somebody random comes up and asks you about this and what they can do to progress forward, what would you say?
Like how to move forward?
Yeah, like I'm having, or it's a tough question to ask kind of thing, but somebody that doesn't have any of these tools, how do you, I guess the question might be, how do you start to appreciate these other nuances?
Oh, I think for for people, if it's really something that's important and it's really something of value and it's really something that they're wanting to explore, maybe without knowing what to explore, sometimes it's actually just starting. Sometimes that's just it. Finding a clinician or somebody to start the conversation and then going in with an open mind. um, it's people come with things they've tried before or they've done different strategies they've heard from somebody's cousin blah 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 removed or whatever. um, and sometimes it's just starting with somebody that you can trust, who's reliable, and who, yeah, going in with an open mind. How would you answer that one? That's a hard one.
I don't know. I think it depends on where somebody's at. But I know, yeah, open mind, be okay with being surprised and having things come up that are unexpected. I mean, I think it's an expectation thing, like you mentioned earlier. Like if you have an expectation in your mind of how things are going to go, the way that your circumstances are set up and the way that your mind works and all of the little details in between aren't going to necessarily care about what you had as your expectation. If the constraints of what you have to work within are a large part of dictating your path forward. only having an intent to stay within these expectations is not going to work. I want to, my expectation is that I'm going to be very consistent with a rigid nutrition plan and be up and running in 1 month. Well, if there's a laundry list of things that somebody has to work through to get that point, no matter what they do, I mean, it's not like they're going to be able to just push through things. I feel like that's where a lot of people resort to like willpower and those things. Like, oh, I need to be better at having stronger willpower and so on. Like they put all of the onus on themselves and their own, it's all a choice, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. I would say one of the things I do talk to my clients about, even within the first 15-minute discovery call, is trying to navigate those expectations. Coming in with, this is hard. We actually are going to talk about all of these things in relation to what it is. And this isn't just a quick fix, 1 month up and running thing, because life doesn't ever seem to work like that. There's always going to be this journey with twists and turns. So I think as dietitians, it's even important to set those right off the hop. And then that's where it would come back down to a client of, is this a priority? Is this a value? Is this something that I really want to do? And that kind of right fit becomes really important then to help guide them. And then with the open mind, it allows all those natural conversations to come in.
I think actually, from what you said, like being a good fit, not only just for us, for like whatever the approach is kind of thing. I mean, because success looks different for different people, but I mean, with how we operate, every dietitian has a different flavor. That's what I always tell my clients. Even on our team, I mean, Revive has a flavor. We all have the flavor of Revive, but we all do things just slightly differently, different personalities, different voices, different ways of communicating and such. But if that's not for you, then that's cool.
Yeah. And yeah, you mentioned even with Revive, right? Every one of us does different specialties, different things on what you're looking for, and it's not all the same. So it's really important for people to seek out what it is they're looking for, the health condition or the area of interest that they're in, and making sure you're working with somebody that fits that, or it isn't going to fit the priorities and the values, and it wouldn't be a good experience. So I think it is really seeking out what it is you need and who to go for that, to get the best, even evidence care too, right? People who specialize in certain areas are going to be more on top of research, or they're going to be more able to speak to those versus not.
I mean, I think my biggest piece for that, even just working with us, is look at our friggin' website beforehand would be helpful. It's getting better. There's more things on there for what all of the answers to some of those questions. Yeah. Man, I feel like we could talk for hours about this crap.
Yeah. What would you say your number one thing that you would want clients to know when working with you?
Oh, number one thing, communicate with me. I always tell people that I work with, I can't read minds. I don't appreciate surprises later on. If you were holding on to something, whether it's a piece of feedback from how I'm doing things or your experience, successes or challenges and whatever else, and then we get a month down the road and then you bring something up and then it's like not a good experience, and then there's some sour feelings. I was like, well, I can't do anything if you don't tell me anything. So yeah, communication is huge. I mean, whatever that is, and I don't expect perfect communication from people. That's silly. But I can't really do my job properly if there's not really solid communication in some way, verbal, text, based, whatever it is, that's going to enrich the experience and will allow me to do what I do, help navigate these areas or whatever area it needs to be, I think. What about you?
That's so funny. Mine would probably actually be the same. Communication goes a long way because a lot of people think that in appointments everything needs to be going well and they need to have been doing everything, and it's supposed to be easy, but the communication of, oh, that was hard and these things came up, and talking about when things get hard and difficult, because those are good points to start working on or being able to address. Where if you're telling me that everything is going really well, um, then we just keep moving on, and that's really not helpful, or helpful to the person who's doing that. Is that's not really giving tools or strategies for that. So between communication and then expectation that this is going to be difficult, and a winding journey, those would be my one and two
Love it.
interchangeably.
Love
Yeah.
it.